often when somebody decides to start training, it's really just deciding to go exercise at the gym. And we make a big differentiation between exercising and training in that exercising is simply going in and doing some movement. Maybe you get a little bit tired, maybe you get a little bit sweaty. And there's nothing wrong with that, except that exercise has a really limited improvement curve. Training, on the other hand, is planned, it's progressive, and over time it will result in a big phase shift in your performance capability. And so if you're just going in and climbing on the moon board with friends, let's not pull training down into that. That's just going in and exercising or even performing a little bit. Training, though, has to be planned, and that's what we're going to talk about in this video. Now, there are a few different styles of periodization or ways of building your programming. One would be what they call classical periodization, where I'm just going to work in one zone of development. Like I'm going to develop my strength for this entire 4-week block. I'm just going to be doing heavy weights, hanging from the hangboard, doing hard boulder problems, and I just want to get a lot stronger, and I'm going to let all the rest of that stuff go. Then in the next training block, I'm going to switch and do something else. I'm going to switch over and just do endurance, and fingers crossed my strength stays up. This type of periodization doesn't work well for climbing, and so we tend not to go into this classical mode. There are several popular climbing training books that sort of adhere to this, but those programs don't tend to produce the results that you would like. They look great on paper. It makes a lot of sense mentally, but we tend to play out and lose fitness in the facets that we're not developing. And unfortunately, climbing requires both strength and endurance at the same time. It requires explosive power and mobility. It requires high levels of capacity. And it's just one of the compromises that we make because of the sport we love. A better way of programming than classical periodization would be to move to what I call nonlinear periodization, where you switch between strength and power and endurance session by session by session. And so I wouldn't be just training one facet of fitness, but I would do a strength session on Monday, maybe a power session on Wednesday, maybe an endurance session on Thursday, and start back in on strength. This works really well for people because we're developing lots of different facets of the sport because we need those facets. The other thing that's really interesting with that is it forces you to take big chunks of time between any given stimulus. If I'm going to put a power and an endurance session between my hangboard sessions, it's just going to be 5 days before I can get back on the thing, and so I can prevent myself from getting too overtrained, getting injured, or getting burned out on that session. And in a nonlinear thing, we might go 6 or 7 or 8 or 10 weeks of the same cycle before we start changing those workouts. Again, each workout will progress, but you're only going to be doing it once every 5 days or every 7 days. Once we play out that nonlinear cycling and it's just not producing results for us anymore, a really good method of programming is to move into what's called block periodization. And block periodization would be a focused block where I'm working on strength. And for us, 2 out of 3 workouts would then be a strength-oriented workout. It would be a developmental style session. And then the 3rd workout of the week would be a maintenance level session that focuses on the other facets of my training, including explosive power and endurance and mobility and whatever else I need to put into that session. And so then I can just go, strength is day 1, strength is day 2, maintenance is day 3, and I'll go through that cycle. It doesn't have to hold to a specific week. If you're a really busy person, maybe you're only training 2 days a week and you're climbing on the weekends, you just keep moving that thing along. And so there's 3 general ways of covering that kind of training. Again, classical periodization, there's nonlinear periodization, and then there is block periodization. There is also just going to the gym and getting tired with your friends, but that, like I said, is going to play out in a big hurry. When we plan out training, I like to look 12 to 24 months into the future. And that is a long time in the future for a lot of climbers, especially young climbers. They just can't imagine thinking, until I'm 22 years old or until I'm 26 years old. But it's really critical that you look at where you are, have an honest assessment of that, talk with a friend or a coach or a mentor, and ask, like, what do you think, what do you see in my climbing that needs to improve? And then addressing not only those weaknesses that we need to improve, but also addressing things that are going to be things we're going to be doing climbing. For example, if next year I plan to be climbing a lot of big walls, I should start developing my work capacity for that. Maybe start to climb on granite, start to climb more cracks, learn about, systems. If I'm going to be going on a bouldering trip, I should start spending more time developing those skills. Because if we really want to perform at our best, we need more than just a few weeks to prepare for those things. When we plan out training, we plan roughly 12 months out in advance, and I prefer to program on 4-week blocks. And so if we can plan on these 4-week blocks, you get 13 4-week blocks per year. Very often, we see an athlete only able to train through 12 of those blocks because the other 4 weeks are eaten up by travel, by holidays, by injuries, illnesses, whatever. And so if you can kind of count on being sick, injured, or unable to train for 4 weeks, a month, a year, and you plan on that in your training, you're going to be much better able to accept that when it comes along. So we've got these 13 4-week blocks. We're going to plan out 12 of them to develop specific facets of our fitness. It's not that something develops in just 4 weeks. It's not like, oh, I'm going to do 4 weeks and I'm going to be ultimately strong. And then I'm going to do 4 weeks and I'm going to have ultimate power. But you are able to put the training in these discrete phases so that it remains interesting to you and so that you have this little stopping point where you're able to go back and go, okay, how's it going so far? How am I going to adjust this next 4 weeks? And so even if we pencil out an entire year worth of training, the only one that we're really, really dialing down is the next 4 weeks that are coming up right now. Now, there's a ton of stuff that we can develop within each of those 4-week frameworks. It's great to have a focus and say, I want to develop this particular thing. I want to get stronger. Also within that 4-week period, you could have a goal of improving one technical skill. I want to work on my heel hooks. You should also have a mental or a tactical skill. I really want to work on my lead head or my red pointing or whatever it is. Within each one of those 4-week phases, we then have a few different things we can work on. A tendency we see in athletes is to progress and progress and progress until one of 3 things happen. They get injured, they get sick, or they overtrain. With the 4-week framework, we're able to say we're going to build up over this 4-week period and then we're going to recover. And generally what we like to see is 3 weeks of increased volume and intensity and then 1 week of recovery at the end of the month that we then use to transition into the following month. And so you can think about that 3 steps forward, 1 step back in each one of these 4-week periods. And so we're going to have this little, stepwise thing that goes throughout the year that is, again, the framework of what our training is going to be. Now, within each one of those weeks, you're going to have a fairly fixed schedule. Almost everybody has a schedule that depends on the week. They have weekends, they have to be somewhere on Monday, they can't train till 5 o'clock on Wednesdays. And so within each one of those weeks, we want to look at where can I put the training that's essential for this week. And then if I'm going to progress the number of training minutes that I do, where can I put those in? That is going to be the foundation of your training, really, is that weekly schedule that you have to fit everything into. What we really need to prioritize is what we're going to do during each of those weeks to improve the things that we need to improve the most. So a week's worth of training is going to have a few sessions where we're really trying to improve our ability to do a specific part of the sport. It's also going to have a few sessions that might be maintaining certain other parts of the sport. And then there's probably some amount of recovery that should take place. And so if you can think in each one of your workouts in terms of a developmental session, one where you're trying to get better at something, a maintenance level session where you're just trying to do the exact same thing as before or hold on to a certain level of fitness, and then a recovery session where you're actually doing some activity to enhance the recovery for those harder sessions. So each one of my weeks will have, a big D for developmental, an M for maintenance, or an R for a restorative session. And so it might be D, M, D, R, D, M as I go across the week there. It's really important to think in these terms. So many athletes think in terms of just developmental. Can I go in and go hard on the moon board with my friends Tuesday night until I'm really, really fatigued? Then I'll try it again on Thursday, and then fingers crossed I can send my project on Saturday. Well, it's a good thing you're crossing your fingers, because the only way that you're going to get better is through luck, and if you don't really plan out your training.